So today we're going to talk about APUs and whether or not you should look at an APU as a cost savings. Uh, I've purchased two APUs. I've always had an APU on my trucks. I had it on my first truck, a diesel-powered tri-pack APU, Thermo King. And then my second truck, I went the electric route, tri-pack NVIDIA. I will say, APUs are expensive. You could pay upwards of $15,000 to get an APU installed on your truck. Now that's a lot of money. And you think, okay, what's the payback time to get that investment back from an APU? It really depends on the price of diesel. Uh, Typically, you'll save about $5,000 a year on diesel. Because what they do, they calculate it based on how many hours you're idling. So typically a truck idle will use 1 gallon per hour, but an APU may only use zero point 0.2 gallons per hour. And then you look at the number of gallons saved uh, by having the APU, and they multiply that by the price of diesel. So the higher the price of diesel, the more opportunity is to save money and get your return on your investment quicker. So if diesel, for example, was at, I think current prices are right around 3.70 a gallon, then it could break even in less than 3 years. However, if diesel prices come down, which many energy experts believe they will, because the Trump administration has an energy policy to have energy dominance, like he did during his first administration, for example. So think about offshore drilling, more permits, drilling on federal lands, drilling on ANWR up in Alaska. Drill, baby, drill. It's going to take a little while, another year or two before those effects come into play. But you can expect diesel prices to keep coming down. They could come down to $2.80 per mile or a gallon, $2.80 per gallon. So if you can imagine lower diesel prices, then the opportunity to save uh, money from an APU becomes less and less and less. There's less savings opportunity. So what the calculations show is that the lower diesel price takes 3 years to get your money back. You may only have the truck for 3 years. So you probably aren't going to save any money by putting an APU on your truck, unless you're excessively idle. But even then, I think that the cost of the APU is so high that the 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 opportunity to save money just isn't really there. I put an APU on my first truck because that was a 2012 Freightliner Cascadia, and you couldn't idle those Cascadia 125 trucks. If you idled the truck, uh, you would end up destroying your one box. But over the years, the technology improved on the trucks where now it's safe to idle. So you can idle the truck and it won't hurt the truck with a modern truck. So the reason to have the APU in the first place was to protect the after treatment system, but that's no longer true. My second truck I bought, I had the mindset that well, fuel prices were high, so that was the first thing. So I went with electric, tried the electric one, and it ran okay, but it doesn't really last a full 10 hours. So you're still going to have to idle the truck to recharge the batteries. There's still going to be some idling there. So, and it didn't perform as well as a diesel powered APU. So 100-degree temperatures, the electric APU really struggled to try to have any impact on it. So it wasn't, as good of an APU as the diesel powered. But the diesel powered one had its faults too. It had breakdowns, fuel pump, um, that had to be replaced. The water pump had to be replaced. Belts have to be replaced. You have to do oil changes. It was temperamental. It would overheat. So it was kind of another piece of equipment that you would have to worry about, do PMs, troubleshoot. Um, they're great when they're brand new. They work like a champ, but after a couple of years, they start developing problems. So if you think about the cost of the APU and your return on your investment, it's not really there. Not with these modern trucks. And you have the additional headache of maintaining a separate motor if it's a diesel powered APU. So you may just run without an APU. They if diesel prices are coming down and APU costs are high, it's a break even endeavor at best. It's like, well, the APU isn't going to really save you any money. Now, you may want an APU just because you want it, but I wouldn't look at it as an investment. And some people believe it's a money pit, because if you get a bad APU and it starts giving you problems, you start sinking more money in that APU. Thermo King technicians don't work cheaply. They'll charge $200 just to change a belt. So you can imagine if you had motor problems and they got to get in there and start troubleshooting it, why it's overheating and stuff like that. You could have easily another $1,000 thrown at that APU. It's already 15 grand. So that really is going to eliminate any cost savings whatsoever. But some guys still want it. They still want it. That's fine. That's your personal preference. But I don't think you should be looking at it as a opportunity to save money, especially when diesel prices are expected to come down. Now, if diesel prices were over $4 per gallon, yeah, now they starts making sense. But now diesel prices are coming down. Right now they're at 3.70 a gallon. In a year or two, they can cut down closer to $3 per gallon. And then now the APU doesn't make sense from a cost benefit analysis. The cost just is too high, and the payback period is too long. By the time you get your money back from the APU, it's time to sell the truck. It'll be 3 years down the road, unless you decide you're going to hold on to that truck and take it all the way up to 1 million miles. If you have long-term plans for that truck, like you're going to do an in-frame overhaul, then you may want the APU. If you're going to hold on to that truck for 5 years, then you may want the APU. But what are the odds you're going to hold on to that truck for 5 years? I doubt you're going to hold on to it that long. I think after 3 years you're going to be wanting another truck. I would recommend another truck, but but the cost of trucks could go up. They keep adding new safety features, new technology, new after treatment systems. The cost of trucks keep going up. So here we are in 2025. You could buy a used 2022 for 80 grand. 3 years from now, that price of a used truck could be 100 grand. And in that case, you'd be like, look, I'll just keep my old truck, do an in-frame and run it for a couple more years. Well, if you're going to do that strategy, then having the APU would make better sense if you're going to keep it past 3 years. But if your intention going in is to rotate trucks every 3 years, there's not a lot of cost savings there. So you got to think about that. Now, also, if you throw $15,000 into an APU, that's $15,000 you're not throwing into your portfolio. Let's just say you put it in an S&P 500, which has a historical average of 10% return every single year. So 15 grand times 10% is $1,500 times 3 years. It's $4,500 in compound interest that you're not getting. $4,500 that you're not getting because you instead put that 15,000 towards an APU. The APU didn't save you any money, and you lost $4,500 from compound interest had you put it in the S&P 500. So that was like an opportunity cost. You had an opportunity to invest that 15 grand, and you would have made $4,500 on that investment. But instead, you bought the APU. That didn't save you any money over a 3-year time period. So, when you look at the cost of the APU of 15 grand and the opportunity cost from the compound interest that you could have had if you invested it at 4,500. 15,000 plus 4,500, you're getting up to 19 to $20,000 is what that APU represents. Because you didn't invest that money. You could have made money on that investment. Instead, you bought the APU. So you had the cost of the APU plus the opportunity cost of not investing. So that was a $20,000 swing in your business. Now you got to ask yourself, was the APU worth it? You're only going to hold on to the truck for 3 years. You didn't save any money on the APU. If it's diesel powered, I guarantee you probably at least once you get for it, not much. You know, this is why guys are just opting not to get with the APU. They just run their truck, they idle their truck. It's like, look, the APU is a money pit. It's another piece of equipment that I got to maintain. I always got to worry about whether it's going to break down, and the repair costs are high, and it's really unnecessary. The truck can do the job, and there's no big difference in costs. So why bother? And you just idle your truck, take that 15 grand, throw it in your investment portfolio, save your money, get the compound interest. Should be $4,500 ahead by not buying APU. So that's kind of the rationale of whether or not to buy an APU or not buy an APU. I know guys, especially rookies really want an APU. Um, APUs were more common in Cascadia 125 models because, like I said, you couldn't idle those old trucks without destroying the one box. And APUs, that was their heyday. But once these trucks were redesigned and you could idle them safely, then the need for the APU just kind of went away. It's lingering around, but I think it's a dying industry. It's more technology is put in these trucks. I mean, you see some of these Cascadias have the battery systems in them as well. Uh, Crete doesn't have that, but I know Schneider does. They have the batteries underneath the catwalk, and then you run the truck and off the idle mode, recharges the batteries, and you have a battery-powered APU that came from the factory that way. And those are great systems. I wish Crete had that. I would be very happy buying a Crete truck if they had that system, but they don't have that system. But the need for a diesel-powered add-on or battery system add-on from Thermo King, the cost benefit analysis just isn't there. In order to be profitable, Thermo King would have to lower their prices, and they're not going to do that. If anything, they're going to raise their prices, which makes it even less appealing for the owner operator. And I don't really think it's necessary with the modern trucks. Having an APU is not really necessary. It may help in reselling your truck. It may help a little bit, but I wouldn't jack up the price of your used truck by 10 grand because the APU's on there. That APU is a used piece of equipment. You might catch someone's eye, but it doesn't really have a lot of value, so yeah, I just don't see it, until someone shows to me, what the cost benefit analysis is. I don't see it. I mean, I bought two of them. I bought two of them on each of my first two trucks, but I'm seriously doubt if I'll put another one on my third truck. It just, I would rather save my money and put it in my investment portfolio and then idle the truck as needed and keep things simple, and don't have the headache of a poorly running APU. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.